We've won millions, taken on the largest insurers, and backed up our reputation with big wins in the courtroom. But only one injury case matters, yours. So if you want to win, we're ready to fight for you.
Rice Law. Best advice, call Rice.
Good morning, Baltimore. It is Thursday, February 19th, and welcome into the latest episode of the Early Birds Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weyrich, alongside Ravens reporter Sam Cohn. Sam, on the day that the Ravens introduced their three coordinators, you were out at M&T Bank Stadium. Sure, it's been a busy day for you. How you doing?
It's so good to be with you, Matt. Obviously, we weren't together for episode numero dos, but it's nice to be back in the chair. This is our first, just you and me. So, you know, we talked a lot on the first episode about how excited we were to get this rolling, and it feels like we're there. And I'm tired. It's a long day, and it's not done, but just happy to be here with you.
Yeah, off season, you know, it ramps up when it ramps up, and then you'll go 2 weeks and you're like, nothing has happened. So
yeah, it's like riding a roller coaster.
Oh yeah, for sure. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into Ravens today. We have some news and notes from Orioles spring training that we'll jump into as well, including a look ahead to the Grapefruit League schedule, which kicks off on Friday against the Yankees. But the news of the day was the Ravens, who introduced their three new coordinators for their coaching staff under Jesse Minter this season. So let's go ahead and jump in. Sam, like I said, you were out at M&T Bank Stadium today as they introduced Anthony Levine and Anthony Weaver and Declan Doyle as their three new coordinators for this staff. What were just kind of your broad takeaways from the group?
Yeah, we learned a good bit having a chance to hear Jesse Minter start with, hey, these are the three guys I'm hiring as my coordinators. This is why I'm hiring each of them. The staff was finalized just a few days ago. So we're starting to get more of a picture of what these Ravens in this new era are going to look like, going to sound like, and going to feel like, you know, watching this all come together. But, and we'll get into, you know, what each said and why those guys, why Jesse Minter feels like those guys are the right guys for the job and what their expectations are individually. But I do want to start with something because I'm curious your thoughts on this. Jesse Minter, let me say this. Four guys sitting in a podium from right to left. Suit, no tie. Suit, no tie. Suit, no tie. Jesse Minter wore a hoodie with a suit jacket. How do you feel?
You know, I like the branching out attempt, but I don't know if he landed it specifically with the jacket. I think the jacket type, the type of material that it was, didn't really look like a full sport coat. So it was a little bit like he was halfway in, halfway out on the look. So I think if he had gone all the way, it would have looked better. But I can understand why some people are looking at that and calling it an atrocity.
I'm not going to be the fashion police, but he's not the first. It's not like he's the first person to do this. I think, is it Andrew Whitworth on one of the,
yes.
Is it Sunday or Monday night?
It's like his patented look, right?
Yeah, there's a couple former players who rock that look. I've seen Adam Schefter rock that look. I shouldn't say. I've seen Adam Schefter wear that look on TV. He's not the first. He won't be the last, but I'm out on it. I think it's a silly look.
I think the football business look has really shaped over the years. And it reminds me of the NBA, where coaches have completely gone away from wearing the suits and stuff on the bench, which I think is complete travesty. You know, like, so the football players coaches, I should say, tend to not have the greatest sense of fashion. And not to dunk all over Jesse Minter, but it wasn't my favorite look. So let's talk some actual football. Declan Doyle did talk about OTAs and what his expectations are for some Ravens players attending to learn the new offense. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, I think that was probably the most newsworthy part of today, was the way that a 29-year-old first-time play caller is looking at taking the reins of this offense. You know, he said a couple things stood out. All of it had to do with the quarterback. All of it had to do with Lamar Jackson. For starters, he said that during the interview process, he spent over an hour on Zoom while Lamar was in Florida, just trying to get to know him, seeing if they're compatible as he was going through the interview process, seeing if those two would hit it off, if they could work well together. And he said that went really well. And he felt really happy about the way those two worked together. And Declan Doyle spoke on the Ravens Have Their Team podcast, and he said some of the similar stuff today when he spoke with reporters about feeling like, he's obviously been impressed by Lamar Jackson, what he's been able to do in his career. He talked about how he and Lamar are in agreement that Lamar has not reached the peak of his powers yet. He talked about how quarterbacks have this Superman-like ability to fix plays when things go wrong, to be the eraser of things falling apart. And Lamar Jackson is like the quintessential example of a quarterback in the NFL who can make things work. Obviously, Declan Doyle worked with Caleb Williams and is coming to a much more seasoned veteran quarterback in Lamar Jackson, who has proven that he can be that guy. So Declan Doyle spoke with Lamar for over an hour during the interview process. And then since then, and even he admitted, like, they haven't chatted a ton, but they have texted back and forth. They've had a few calls where they've, again, gotten on the same page. You're just trying to learn about one another. Declan Doyle wants to learn how Lamar ticks. Lamar wants to learn the kind of coach who will be calling the offense. And those two have got to know each other a little bit. So the interesting part, I think, off of that was, Declan Doyle obviously excited to work with Lamar, but Declan Doyle took a little bit of what felt like or could be read as a shot at Lamar and a few other veterans. I don't think it was a specific Lamar thing, but one could read it that way, where he said, and I'm going to read the quote here. He said, "We would certainly," this is in response to a question about optional practices and OTAs and, before getting into training camp, being in Baltimore and being with the team, because as they said, they're in a sprint to get all this figured out, now having their staff in place. Declan Doyle said, quote, "We would expect them to be here, and certainly it is voluntary. But if you want to say that you're going to win a championship, if you want to say that you have championship standards and those are your goals and expectations, certainly that's going to take work." And as we know, Lamar Jackson in previous years has not been in Baltimore for optional practices, which, to emphasize, are optional. He's not the only one. There are several other veterans. I believe Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, a couple other guys, have missed some of those practices. Notably, Derrick Henry is one of those guys who has been at all those practices. I think Mark Andrews has been at most of them, if not all of them too. But that's been a huge talking point in this team's ability to get over the hump, is their quarterback saying the kinds of things like, hey, I want our players, I want to be more involved in player activities and I want to get guys closer together, but not being there for those kinds of things. That's been a common theme. So it's interesting to hear Declan Doyle work around addressing that idea.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like he has to be there. Lamar does. I mean, it's one thing to not be coming to OTAs, which again, as you said, are voluntary. It is at the end of the day his choice. But to not show up when you're winning MVPs, when you're coming off of playoff appearances, when the offense was one of the best units in the league the year before, all of that, is totally understandable. He's earned the right to do that kind of thing as a two-time MVP winning quarterback. But when you are coming off a year in which there were problems with the offense, you are coming off a year in which you missed the playoffs, you're coming off a year when you changed not just your head coach, but also your offensive coordinator and brought in a brand new staff. Instead of setting aside the message that it sends to not show up in all those situations, you are just picking up this new offense. And yes, Lamar has changed offenses before. This is not going to be a new challenge for him. He has shown the ability to adapt to the Greg Roman's offense, the Todd Monken offense, and I'm sure he is going to adapt well to the Declan Doyle offense. But now with all of these new ideas coming in, particularly with Jesse Minter as the new head coach, first time in your career that you're going through a head coaching change, I would be distressed if I'm Ravens brass seeing Lamar Jackson not show up to OTAs.
I was going to say, Matt, this was, I think this past season really shined a light on this idea about Lamar, who his entire career, to his credit, has been unapologetically himself. There are a lot of guys at his position in the NFL who do things a certain way to portray a certain type of person. And Lamar, again, to his credit, has always been himself, and he does things his way. And when you're winning, that's great and that's fine. And people don't worry about that kind of thing. But when you're losing and you're missing the playoffs and Lamar Jackson is missing time because he's hurt, you start to wonder. I'm not saying it's a direct line between him being at optional practices and them missing the playoffs. Like, I'm not trying to draw that line, but it's one of the things you start to think about doing the extra things with your teammates when you look at how the offense wasn't clicking for so much of the season, when you look at how they fell short in several respects and how he wasn't on the same page. I mean, there there were conversations late in games about him not being on the same page as Todd Monken up in the booth. And there were conversations about how the offense not being able to click, and Lamar Jackson, obviously, again, missing time. Like, you start to wonder about, can that be one of the things that fixes those? And that is so much more important when you have a new staff and a new offensive coordinator and a new group where you're all trying to get on the same page to make things work in a championship window that is short.
Yeah, and it's like the Anthony Rendon case in MLB. You know, it's endearing when a guy's like, oh, he doesn't even care, and he's out here hitting 30 home runs. Like, you know, that's great. That's endearing. That's what adds to the charm. But as soon as that starts to fall off, then the questions are coming, well, should he be doing more to make sure? Because when you have that kind of reputation, and not saying that that's necessarily how Lamar approaches football. He certainly is his own person in that way. But when you are having a reputation of not being, you know, your Kobe mentality, you're showing up, you know, 5 hours before practice to get ready and everything. Like, if you don't have that reputation, it is going to start raising questions when things aren't working out of, is he doing enough? Is there a certain level that this team is not able to achieve because their quarterback isn't doing everything he can to make sure they succeed? So that starts with OTAs, and it's, you know, something that is easy enough to do, to show up when the majority of your teammates are there, go through some reps. You know, Lamar is good about, you know, bringing some of his receivers in over the offseason and working out with them. You know, that is clearly something that he has made a point of emphasis for himself over the offseason, and that's great. But to be there when your offense coordinator is there, when you're, you know, not necessarily going through full live practice, but at least have your offensive line in front of you and you're moving parts, you're running plays, you know, those kinds of things are things that really, when you are going through so much change and have so much uncertainty about where this organization is headed and what exactly they're going to do to bounce back, it really does quell a lot of the narratives just to start, and gets you kind of on a better foot to, you know, be able to be yourself later throughout the season.
Yeah, it's not like he's cut off all contact with his teammates or anything. I did a story during training camp about a local Baltimore photographer who has gotten close with several players, who was fortunate enough to spend time in Florida at a workout with Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson. Snoop Huntley was there. He wasn't even on the Ravens at that point. And Malik Cunningham. There might have been a couple other guys too. But the point being that, like, it's not like he's not talking to these guys. It's not like he's not working out with them. It's just not in Baltimore. And his whole, I mean, he made that draft night promise to go win a Super Bowl. And when you look at someone who is now 29 years old and has gotten close but has not gotten over the hump, the questions start to come about the things that are separating him and his team from where they have the talent to get. And again, like, Declan Doyle is someone who, being a first-time play caller, being the new offensive coordinator for an offense of this caliber, it's just that much more important that in some way, shape, or form, and as quickly as possible, they do get on the same page, whatever that looks like, whether it's from afar over Zoom. And again, like, just to say, to Lamar's credit, there was a lot of speculation during the process where General Manager Eric DaCosta and Steve Bisciotti didn't like say a ton about how involved Lamar or other players were. They said he was involved in some capacity, but they didn't really give any details. I believe Declan Doyle was the first person to give some kind of specific, like, yes, we were on the phone over Zoom for over an hour, just getting to know each other. Like, that's the first real, yes, he was on Zoom and we talked for a while. So Lamar Jackson has been involved in the process. I'm not saying that he's like removing himself, but it will be paramount to the success of this team that they get on the same page quickly. And the best way to do that is by showing up to OTAs.
No doubt. Before we move on to the defense, do want to ask you, what insight did we get from Declan Doyle on the kind of offense that the Ravens are going to have this year, if anything, now that he is branching off from Ben Johnson?
Yeah, he talked about wanting to get the ball out quicker. He talked about chasing creativity. He talked about explosive plays. Explosive plays were a big part of Ben Johnson's offense. I think Ben Johnson had said at one point last year, maybe the year before, that he doesn't really like the tush push because you're not getting an explosive, you're not generating an explosive play off the tush push. Might be the
least explosive play in the NFL.
Exactly. So I think, and we talked about this on the first episode, that Ravens fans would love to sign up for someone, a disciple of Ben, or they would love to sign up for Ben Johnson. They're getting someone who is very similar, and there's going to be a deep well of trick plays that are ironed out and that they can figure out. Like I think that's probably an expectation with where he's coming from and who Declan Doyle is. So it'll be interesting to see. But again, I think with a lot of this team, with the pieces in place, you're looking at, okay, what has worked with this group? And it's funny, there were a lot of questions about Lamar, but not very many about Derrick Henry. But Declan Doyle has said that, he sees a lot of value and cares about and knows that the run game is an important part of the fabric of Ravens football. And they have one of the best running backs in the league. So I don't think they're gonna get away from that in any way. But it's how can Declan Doyle put his spin from what he's learned under Ben Johnson? How can he put his spin on what the Ravens already have in place? So, which will be interesting to see what that looks like as we get closer to training camp.
Yeah, that first Ronnie Stanley touchdown is going to hit like crack. I guarantee it. So looking over at the other side of the ball, Anthony Weaver obviously knows what a Ravens defense looks like at its best as far as the identity of what this organization has had for a long time. What did he say about getting back to that and whether or not he's embracing reestablishing that identity?
I want to start with something that I feel like I've written ad nauseum about, but I think it's really important in terms of telling the story of the Ravens defense, which is the last 2 seasons, they tanked from one of the best defenses, the best defense in football in 2023 to, 2024 and 2025, they needed turnarounds to go from worst to first. And, this past season, they finished kind of around the middle of the league in most categories. They really, really struggled to get hands on the quarterback and to rush the passer. They struggled a lot these last 2 years. And the thread that we kept hearing is, most vocally by Marlon Humphrey, but Zach Orr agreed and other players agreed, is that they lost the standard and that the Ravens defense was no longer feared, which was, again, like interwoven into the fabric of what Ravens football has always been. And what they see in Anthony Weaver, and bringing a guy like Anthony Weaver to be the defensive coordinator, this is going to be largely Jesse Minter's scheme. But Anthony Weaver can be the guy who is that connector, because this is his 3rd stint in Baltimore. His first stint was 2 seasons removed from a Super Bowl that was defined by one of the best defenses in NFL history. His second stint was part of one of the best recent era of defenses in the NFL. The Ravens 2023 defense was exceptional. Obviously, Anthony Weaver was a defensive line coach from 21 to 23, and then he leaves to go to Miami. And this being his 3rd stint, he wants to get back to that. So I asked him today, and I wrote about this too. You can read about it on the BaltimoreSun.com about, that has been a talking point over the last 2 seasons of getting back to being quote unquote feared. So I asked him, like, 1, has that kind of been in his purview? And 2, what does that look like for an Anthony Weaver defense in what him and Jesse Minter have deemed this new age of playing like a Raven? So here's what Anthony Weaver had to say about that.
Over the past 2 years, there's been a lot of talk within the locker room about just the idea of getting the Ravens defense back to being feared. I'm curious if, 1, if that's been in your purview at all, and 2, for you in this defense, what might that look like?
It's funny because you say that, and I instantly go back to this shirt from when I was like a rookie. They used to say it's better to be feared than loved, right? It had the Baltimore Raven on it. I don't know if it wasn't like an officially issued shirt, but I go straight to that. And ultimately, I just think it's about how we play, right? It's about us, like, going out there and flying around the ball, having 11 guys connected, right, that are in a flow state, that kind of know what each other is doing. We're just flying around, looks like a pack. Looks like we have 13 guys out there. That's what we're chasing. Defeating blocks. You get a chance to intimidate and hit somebody, let's do it. Let's make sure we do that. But the one thing I know is just having been with so many of these guys prior, like, they have that. It's ingrained in their DNA. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. So we're just trying to get back to that standard. I don't know what happened the last 2 years. I know when I try to take, there's still a lot of things to get excited about. We just got to make sure we're more consistent in those actions.
I think the interesting part there is that, his mind fluttered back to a very specific moment that, again, like, I draw that line between where he started, where he was, and where this Ravens defense can go. I think schematically you're leaning a lot on what Jesse Minter has been able to do at Michigan and at LA, with the Chargers and at prior stops. But that this idea of the Ravens defense, like Anthony Weaver, that's like in his blood. And that's what he wants to be for this group. The idea of having that t-shirt that says, you want to be feared, not loved. It was just funny to hear him say that, because that's been the whole issue with this Ravens defense. And we wrote about this year how several players felt like their defense was playing a little bit scared, a little bit timid. And the Ravens defense, that's always been, at one point, Anthony Weaver said that the reason, he interviewed for half the head coaching vacancies. Of the 10, he interviewed for 5, one of them being the Ravens. And he got passed over for all of them. But he didn't view this Ravens defense coordinator job as any kind of consolation prize, because in his eyes, to be the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, again, in his eyes and in his words, is to be the defensive coordinator for the league, because the Ravens historically have been at the forefront of great defenses. His perception of what is a great defense comes from his first 2 stints with the Ravens, the success he had as a player and the success he had as a defensive line coach. He wants to bring that back, and it's interesting to hear him acknowledge, even if not specifically when he says, I don't know necessarily specifically what happened here the past 2 seasons, but that idea of being feared is the only thing that he knows when it comes to Ravens defense. So he was, again, it's not a consolation prize for him, because he wanted this job and he sees a chance to go win a Super Bowl with this group. It's just a matter of, can that defense be the reason that they get there rather than the hindrance as they have been the past 2 years.
Yeah, and there are certainly pieces in this defense that you feel pretty good about building a unit around. And we talked about this in the last episode with Josh, but the defensive line, whether or not you get Madubuike back or not, is a key area you're going to have to fix. And really, if you are going to establish that Ravens feared mentality, the pass rush really is first and foremost what has to happen, because that is what really instills, those hard hits, things like that, making the quarterback having to second guess if somebody is coming up behind you. To have that kind of attack is obviously is Josh's number one thing that the Ravens have to address this offseason. It's forefront of mind, certainly, for Eric DeCosta, who has also mentioned DBs, the secondary as well. So the defensive side of the ball, you bring in a defensive-minded coach in Jesse Minter. Now you have Anthony Weaver here, who is going to be, I don't know if tone setter is the right word, but somebody, who kind of what Declan Doyle was in Chicago under Ben Johnson with him calling the plays. Now he's going to be that communicator, that guy who is maybe a little bit able to focus in on some of the individual assignments and making sure guys are really doing what they are being asked to do. Because when you have your head coach calling plays on the defense, the coordinator underneath him can maybe look at some other assignments and look at personnel a little bit differently.
Matt, I didn't put this in our planning doc because I kind of wanted your more unfiltered reaction, because I don't know how much of the press conference you're able to tune in on, but I think this was one of my favorite parts of the entire presser. You mentioned the defensive line, and we talk about the frustrating lack of pass rush for the Ravens this past season. Our Sun columnist, Mike Preston, in a very unfiltered and a commendable way, asked Anthony Weaver straight up. He's like, what was wrong with the pass rush last year? When you go back and watch the film, like, what did you see? And he asked sort of a similar question about the secondary, but he asked pretty directly, like, what did you see about the lack of pass rush last year? And Anthony Weaver's immediate reaction of just like him smiling and dropping his head a little bit, to me felt like this kind of admission of like, yeah, like, not going to say it, but he knows they struggled. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows they struggled. He's probably not going to be the one who wants to come out and say that directly. And the first words out of his mouth were, we got pass rushers, right? We got guys who can certainly get to the quarterback. And he mentioned fairly that them losing Nnamdi Madubuike in week 2 really hurt them, but they never recovered from that. And the next name out of Anthony Weaver's mouth was Kyle Hamilton. So it's
not
a problem.
Pass rusher, to be clear.
Yeah, a guy who they were able to put in positions to go get in the backfield, but who is, he's the quintessential chess piece, as they call him. But he's not the first name you want coming out of your mouth when you're talking about guys who can rush the passer. It felt like a very honest moment, and it was just funny to hear him say that, because, again, like as you said, and as we'll continue to talk about, that was a huge issue. I know Josh got all riled up in the last episode about how Aaron Rodgers is 42 years old and they couldn't get hands on him. Wait, is Aaron Rodgers 42 years old? Is that true? Because if so, if him and Jesse Minter are the same age, that's really funny.
That's great. And you know what? Charlie Morton's older than both of them.
Awesome. Get those three in a room. That's a dream golf foursome.
Just for the sake of our listeners, he is 42 years old. We've taken 2 episodes, but we have established that fact.
Me, Charlie Morton, Jesse Minter, and Aaron Rodgers. Dream golf foursome. Not actually. But it is, I think, and a lot of people maybe who have heard Anthony Weaver speak in press conferences when he was in Miami, or, watch the way he speaks and the way he addresses players and talks to the media during his first stint, the few times that he spoke during his first stint with the Ravens. It's funny because he's this guy who's supposed to be the rah-rah, get the best out of guys, but the way he talks, he's so smooth and charismatic and interesting and funny, and that he's not going to behind closed doors could be very different, but he really can get the best out of guys, and the way he talks, it does have that thread, or that, have that make guys want to run through a brick wall even when he's not screaming. He talked the other day on a podcast about how he referenced a movie. Now I'm blanking on the school, but it was about their basketball practices being 40 minutes of hell, and he wants to put opposing offenses in 60 minutes of hell. When he talks about what he wants the Ravens defense to be, it's 60 minutes of hell, but he says it so calmly and cool, and it makes you just kind of that's just the way he gets guys going. And so I think that's going to be his whole thing. He's going to be an extension of Jesse Minter's scheme. They've coached similar schemes at separate places, but he's going to be the guy who, just to kind of go back to what we were talking about before, he wants him to be feared, not loved, which is something the Ravens have not been able to do the past 2 seasons. Yeah.
And speaking of Minter, he obviously was there as well, as we've talked about, and other than his sweatshirt jacket combo. Sam, what was just kind of your takeaway from Minter's comments, and maybe how Anthony Levine Sr. Is kind of almost an extension of what he's trying to build?
Definitely. For Jesse, the one line that really stood out from everything that he said today, and again, he had a lot of really nice things to say about obviously the 3 coordinators he hired and why he chose each of them. But I think the thing that was interesting was his way of talking about this quote unquote new age of playing like a Raven. When you look at, we've talked about this, the 4 guys that were sitting at the podium, 3 of them have connections to the Ravens. Anthony Levine Sr. played, Jesse Minter coached, and Anthony Weaver played and coached. Declan Doyle's the only new guy to the 4, and this was a big talking point when they turned over from John Harbaugh, is with the new guy, how much does this change? And Jesse Minter talked about them being in the early stages of stripping everything down to the studs, but they're not going to lose who they are. We just spent a few minutes talking about how Anthony Weaver wants to get back to who they were as a defense, but it's maybe it's funny to say, but the head coach is wearing a hoodie and a jacket. This is new. They're young. They're different. This is a whole different era. It's a very different cast of characters who want to take this whole, long-standing idea of what it means to play like a Raven and make it their own. They don't want to lose the core values of the organization, but they are going to put their own spin on it. Things are going to look and feel a little bit different because they have a bunch of coaches who are, in some respects, half the age of the former coach. Anthony Levine Sr., Declan Doyle's 29, John Harbaugh's in his 60s. So things look a little bit different. Todd Monken too. So this whole idea of there's going to be a shift in what the Ravens are without losing the core of who they've always been. To me, that's the biggest takeaway. And Jesse Minter's not afraid to broach that topic, to have that conversation about how, yes, this is a new age of what it means and looks like to play like a Raven. And I think that's completely fair of him, because these Ravens, although they've been good, you look at recent years, they've taken a step back year over year. It's time for something to be new. It's time for something to be different, rather than the Ravens resting too much on their laurels of past success. It's time for them. The only way I think they're going to get over the hump is if they do acknowledge, yes, we can maintain our core values. We can be who we've always been, while also stepping into what he is calling a new age.
Absolutely. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap there on Ravens. Sam has one parting thought, though.
I should say one more thing, because you asked about Anthony Levine, and I didn't answer your question.
Good to circle back. Look at you.
The one thing that was really worth noting, and I mean, this is the nature of the NFL. There's just not as much interest in this. Unfortunately, there's not as much interest in the special teams coordinator, which stinks because Anthony Levine Sr. is a really nice guy, and I think he's going to do great things for the special teams unit. But one, he had said that when he was going through the process, the thing that he loved about playing for Jesse Minter when he was a player and Jesse was a coach was that Jesse always told them what they needed to hear and not what they wanted to hear. He loved that transparency as a player. He sees that as something that can carry over to his head coaching tenure. And then the other thing was that Jesse Minter said that Anthony Levine Sr. was, the face of what their special teams will be. He's the face of that Ravens idea of like being good on special teams. And I think you could argue that was John Harbaugh because he was the head coach who cared so much about it because he was a former special teams coach. But, in this new era or whatever, obviously that changes. But I think it's interesting to hear Jesse Minter say that Anthony Levine Sr. is going to be the face of that. And two, there was, as far as I know, just one player in the building, and Anthony Levine Sr. shouted him out, and that was Keandre Jackson, who flew into Baltimore to be there to support him. Keandre Jackson, obviously a safety who was I feel like year after year, the Ravens always have a guy who comes out of the woodworks to be a great special teamer. And this past season, that was Keandre. So it was nice to see, him there in support of Anthony Levine, and for him to get a shout out too was cool.
Yeah, pretty telling when only one guy is there, and he's there for the special teams coordinator, who obviously has many connections to this organization, as several of these coaches now do. And it is clearly a new era for the Ravens in more ways than one, certainly with, as you mentioned, the age of the coaches and the culture that they're going to bring, but also the way that this coaching staff is set up and moving away from the CEO style that John Harbaugh was, and having maybe a different way of dedicated approach, I would say, to each of these units in a way that maybe was distributed differently in years past. So, Sam, great insight on today's press conference. Looking forward to following Ravens offseason as things start to ramp up here with the next week, right, is when Josh is traveling out.
Yes, Josh heads to Indianapolis in just a few days for the next week's NFL Scouting Combine. And then after that, first we get excited to hear about when or if we get a Lamar Jackson contract news. We get into free agency, and then we hit to the draft.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap there on Ravens and talk some Orioles right after this.
What if you settle your accident case too soon, only to realize you left thousands, even millions on the table? At Rice Law, we fight for every dollar you deserve. Don't settle for less. Get the right lawyer right now.
Rice Law. Best advice, call Rice.
If you would like what you're hearing on Early Birds podcast, you should definitely sign up for the Baltimore Sun's free sports newsletter sent right to your email. We are in the locker room, the clubhouse, at practice, and at every single game, talking to our sources and observing all of this information that we put into Baltimore Sun's weekly Orioles Insider and Ravens Insider newsletters. Sign up for free at baltimoresun.com/newsletters.
Matt, we're close. We're getting so close to opening day. You can smell it. Baseball is nigh. We're very close. We start with some fake baseball, which is the Grapefruit League, if I'm not mistaken. That kicks off on Friday. So you've been down in Sarasota for about a week, learning a lot about what this team could look like, and they're finally going to start playing some form of real baseball. So I guess, just for starters, what are you most looking forward to seeing, learning, and hearing as they finally start playing some baseball?
Yeah, we've been watching the fake baseball to prepare for the fake baseball to prepare for the real baseball. And
as
that
it should be.
Is the live bullpen sessions that have been kind of capturing social media so far. Getting real good shots from behind home plate, practicing my vertical video. It's nice. You can get some really good angles that you can't during the season, so that has been cool. But yes, very excited for actual games to start taking place. They are still early spring training. You don't want to read too much into things like lineups, as Craig Alpernaz said on Wednesday. Try not to read too much into who's batting where. things are certainly fluid, but also spring training is about getting guys at bats more than anything else. And you might put a guy lead off just because you want to guarantee he gets up the plate 2 or 3 times before you take him out, as opposed to batting him lower in the order when he might bat only once or twice. So things like that aren't super important. Who the starting pitcher is for Friday's game, not super important, though. We do have a little pool going in the Orioles beat right now as to who we think is going to be the Grapefruit League opening day starter. So stay tuned for that this weekend to see who.
I was going to say, can you give us, without naming names, can you give us a little about where people are leaning?
Yeah, we're going a lot of prospects. My pick was Nestor Rahman, which I was a little bit later in the draft. It wasn't my first choice. My first choice would have been Trey Gibson, who is kind of lined up to start that day with what he's been doing as live bullpens. But we've also got an Albert Suarez in there. I think maybe a Dean Kramer. Nobody chose like a elite reliever. Like there's no Andrew Kittredge or Ryan Helsley or Yennier Cano. So if one of those guys does end up starting, we're all going to be pretty shocked. But
Great.
Going off of years past, it was Albert Suarez last year, and the year before that it was Corbin Burns, who very much wanted to take the ball first in a very Corbin Burns way. So, but you asked the question, I'm going to go ahead and answer it, and that is what I'm looking to watch here in spring training. And just start, we've got 5 things that I kind of want to roll through. Number 1 is Zach Eflin. Now, Eflin is coming off of August back surgery, a procedure that really had been putting off throughout his career, and had a pretty gruesome rehab with a lot of pain this offseason, and somehow, some way, showed up to camp saying that he is ready for a regular spring training and expects to build up the same as everyone else. His first live BP was about a week after everyone else's, so maybe he's a week behind. But I think the true case here of whether or not he's going to be ready for opening day is going to be what he looks like here in Grapefruit League play, what his velo looks like, and with that, how he's able to kind of work in all of his pitches. He's been working on his arm slot, which is something that is a big thing that could be a big key for him to bounce back this year because of the way his back was bothering him the last 2 years. His arm slot kind of lowered a little bit, and he wasn't able to have as much deception on his pitches, not being able to throw overhead and get as much spin. So now he says he's able to get his arm back to where it was when he was getting Cy Young votes with the Tampa Bay Rays. So what he looks like throughout the spring, we are going to see some StatCast numbers. We'll get into that a little bit. But what exactly Eflin looks like, I think, is going to be a pretty telling thing, because it also is going to decide what the Orioles do with their rotation, whether they go in with a 6-man rotation, whether they demote somebody. There's a lot of different ways they can go, and Eflin is kind of right now the X factor for that group.
You beat me to it, Matt. That's exactly what I was going to ask. I mean, I'm curious from your perspective, being down there, talking to guys, as you get a better sense of where everyone is at. Feel like, this question comes up every year. If Zach Eflin is healthy, do they try a 6-man rotation? Is someone left on the cutting room floor? How obviously those things can change so quickly. If the next person gets hurt, things change quickly. But I'm curious, like if Zach Eflin is ready to go, if he is healthy, how do you envision the rotation playing out?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways they can go right now, and honestly, it could be a moot point by the end of spring if somebody gets hurt and then they have 5 guys. But right now they've kind of got like 7-8 starters that they have to figure out. Tyler Wells is in that mix as well. Albert Suarez can be a starter or reliever. So they've got options, not to mention Cade Povich and Brandon Young, who could be either in a bullpen role or stretched out in AAA as depth there as well. So a lot of different ways they could go. I do think a 6-man rotation's on the table right now. And it seems like it would make sense for this group, at least early on in the season, to kind of manage their workload. Kyle Bradish is going to be on an innings limit this year in his first full season back from Tommy John. You have Shane Baz, who had Tommy John himself a couple of years ago. You have Trevor Rogers, who's never thrown, I believe it's over 140 innings in a season. So there are plenty of guys that, and not to mention Zach Eflin, there are plenty of guys that you have to kind of manage the workloads for. And a 6-man rotation, at least early in the year, could kind of set up guys so that by the end of the season, they're able to be at full strength and go into the playoffs rolling.
I hate even asking, because it almost feels like that question is the kiss of death. Since I've been around or helping cover the Orioles, which obviously you've been on the beat full time, about as long as I've just been kind of helping out and helping you cover this team, it feels like anytime someone asks the question about a 6-man rotation, that's the kiss of death. And within days, someone else is getting hurt and it's a moot point. So as you said, this could become a non-starter of a question very soon. But it'll be interesting to see how a first-year manager handles a decision like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to get more insight into what kind of manager Craig Alvarez is going to be as we get closer to opening day, and some of the ways that he manages this organization and kind of his thought process going decisions like that. So let's go move on to number 2 thing I'm looking forward to watching here in Grapefruit League play, and that is Kobe Mayo and Jeremiah Jackson's defense. Now, the Orioles, with Jackson Holliday expected to miss the start of the season with his broken hamate bone, have an opening at second base. I think Blaze Alexander is the favorite to be playing in that spot to start the season. Whether or not maybe he plays third and they move Jordan Westberg over remains to be seen. But I think Alexander is probably the most likely guy to see playing time as a result of Holliday being hurt. But it does open up a spot on the bench, and Jeremiah Jackson and Kobe Mayo are probably the 2 leading candidates for that spot. Heston Kjerstad maybe is in that conversation as well. But Mayo and Jackson really, to cement their case on this roster, have to prove that they can be relied on in multiple positions. Now, we aren't going to see much of Kobe Mayo at first base. There's just too crowded of a position now with Pete Alonso there playing every day, and also you have Ryan Mountcastle there to spell him when needed. So probably the more likely position you're going to be seeing him is at third base, and that's where we've been seeing Mayo actually get the majority of his reps so far in spring, has been at third base, a position that he came up through the minor leagues for the most part playing and had to move off of because of defensive concerns. And really, I think that defensively with his glove, he's fared pretty well. It's his throws across the diamond that have been the biggest problem. And from my vantage point here in spring, that is still something that he needs to work on. He's skipping throws across the diamond a little bit more often than you might like. And then Jeremiah Jackson, who is technically a natural shortstop, but also has defensive concerns of his own. The Orioles stuck him in the outfield last year when they called him up. He played some third base. He's now taken a lot more majority of his ground balls at second so far, though Craig Alvarez has said that he'll be seeing time all over the diamond as well. Do they need the defensive versatility with Blaze Alexander able to play defense pretty well at 4 different positions? Probably not, but it certainly wouldn't hurt either's case as they try to make a case to be on this major league roster for opening day.
Curious about Pete Alonso. Is this what's it been like being around him and watching him and seeing his development? I know you and Josh talked a little bit about how his leadership style and his competitiveness is sort of rubbing off on other guys. Just take me more into a little bit about what you've seen from Pete Alonso and your excitement to see him play the second iteration of fake baseball.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like I can't walk across this Orioles complex without seeing Pete Alonso, feeling Pete Alonso's presence. I mean, he is everywhere. He's running around in the drills. He's chatting up, a bunch of different guys. He's over there grabbing Cal Ripken Jr. after practice for 15 minutes to chat. He's chirping pitchers during live bullpen sessions, even when he's not hitting. He has certainly made his presence felt here at Orioles camp so far, and to hit, Baltimore's credit, the city so far, but between the team and the fan base, has really embraced him so far, and he's felt that. And I think that has also been something that he's fed off of a little bit. Every time that he's walking off the field, 15,000 fans are swarming him trying to get autographs. And I'm standing there and all I'm hearing are things like, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for not going to the Dodgers. Like, we can't wait to have you in this lineup. Thank you for choosing us, for choosing Baltimore, that kind of thing. It's funny. Like, I look at Pete Alonso sometimes and I'm just like, this guy shouldn't, how did the Orioles get this guy? Like, he is just a bigger than life presence in baseball, a household name. And for them to have got a guy like that, whose personality seems to be gelling really well with the culture that the Orioles are trying to build, I think it's been a perfect fit so far.
Yeah, it's well said. And just to rehash a little bit of, before we started this podcast, as in started Early Birds, for his intro presser, I think that was my biggest takeaway, was he made it very obvious that he wanted to be somewhere where he could have that kind of impact. He was ready to be that guy. He established himself as one hell of a baseball player, but he was never going to be that guy on the Mets. And he could come to a mid-major city or a middle-tier city and a team that with championship caliber type aspirations and be the difference maker, but also be the face, be the one that gets a lot of these young guys to step up in a new way and be the guy that fans are really excited about and eager to be around and thankful for. Like, that was my biggest takeaway just from hearing the first time Pete Alonso opened his mouth with an Orioles uniform on, was like, came here because I wanted that, and I want to win a World Series, and I feel like this is a place where I can do both.
Yeah, and to segue into what I'm looking for from him in spring. I mean, he's Pete Alonso. There's nothing that he needs to prove in spring training. But honestly, one thing I'm most excited to see is what a Pete Alonso home run looks like in an Orioles uniform. I mean, obviously that's going to drive up fan excitement just to see that happen a couple of times. I think in a way that almost nothing else can here in spring training as far as results wise, but also just for the vibes alone. I mean, for a couple of Alonso homers to come, going through people's feeds and drumming up excitement and people starting to really dream on what this lineup could look like, I think it could go a really long way.
Yeah, completely agree. That's the thing that's going to get Orioles fans back. I mean, there are fan bases across sports who constantly feel like they're going to get hurt again, but allow themselves to fall back into the trap of the early season hype. And I'm sure there are a lot of fans who see this as, the Orioles are just going to hurt me again. But the thing that's going to really draw them back in is whether or not they see Pete Alonso during spring training mash a few over the fence. Because I'm sure there are a fair number of Orioles fans who are just starting to get back into catching up about everything that happened this offseason. Hopefully a lot of them are listening to this podcast to follow along and learn along about what's going on. But I mean, to see Pete Alonso, again, as you mentioned, people could scroll through their feed and see a few Pete Alonso home runs. That's going to drum up some excitement.
Absolutely. Moving on to number 4 is Gunnar Henderson's base running. Now, Henderson is going to be playing in the World Baseball Classic this spring, so he won't be there for the entire Grapefruit League play, and fans obviously will be able to tune in and watch him to that. However, when he is playing with the Orioles here in Florida, I am interested to see just how aggressive he's going to be on the base pass. Now, the Orioles brought in a new first base coach this offseason, so what exactly their mentality is going to be on the base pass as a team is certainly up for debate right now as well. But Henderson stole a career-high 30 bases last year, and I wonder just how, not just sustainable that is necessarily, because he is a fast player and certainly so young still that, Gunnar could steal a ton of bases next year, and nobody would be shocked. But how aggressive he's going to be on the base pass once his power returns, because obviously he was playing through injury last year. Everyone, in this organization, and certainly myself, fully expects him to get back to the levels that he was in 2024, a 40 homer threat. When he is hitting for that kind of power, is he still going to be as aggressive on the base pass when he's not maybe trying to make up for the fact that he's not going over the fence? So I think that we'll see that a little bit in spring training. He's certainly going to attempt some steals just to test out his legs, but how aggressive he's being, the types of pitches that maybe he's running on, what his reads look like off of pitchers, I think is going to be fascinating as we kind of see what kind of player Gunnar Henderson's going to be in 2026.
Just to that point, to take a step back, it's one of the things on a long list of curiosities that we'll look forward to learning about as we see Craig Albernaz in this role, and take over this team. Because you'll remember better than I, that was a huge conversation post Brandon Hyde, was how those stolen base numbers changed, how there was so much more encouragement for guys to stretch their legs and go give it a shot. And if you get it, great. If not, it's a lost season. You got to go try something. How does that back half of last year, where your Jackson Hollidays and your Colton Cowsers and your Gunnar Hendersons were stealing more bases, or at least trying to steal more bases? Okay, that was a test period where, again, it's a lost season and you want to see what you can do, and this is a long-term play. How does that roll over into new manager, new team, new organizational direction, new ideas? How much does that pay off? How much do they really lean into what was thought to have been learned during that period?
Yeah, and I don't think there's any doubt that Gunnar Henderson is going to have the green light to run whenever he wants. I mean, a guy like Jackson Holliday, who was among the league leaders in caught stealing last year, might be tempered back, and they're going to probably work on his opportunities of when he can steal or when is a good opportunity for him to try to take a base, as opposed to Gunnar Henderson, who, him and Colton Cowser, especially Cowser, I believe, didn't get thrown out last year, are guys that I think will have the complete trust of the coaching staff to go whenever they want to. So I think it's going to come down to what Gunnar wants to do. Obviously stealing bases can put you at risk of injury. If you're having a prolific power year, do you really feel like you have to force it on the base pass to prove your value? That is something that I think has to enter a player's consciousness. So we'll see just how much he makes that a focal point of his game.
Did you see the movie Caught Stealing?
I have not. I've seen a
movie.
shockingly low number of sports movies in general. I have like a long list that I need to watch. Like I really need
I
to
wouldn't
catch
call
up.
it a sports movie.
Okay. Well, it's called Caught Stealing. I figured.
Yeah. There are some major undertones of baseball. Excellent book. It's a chaotic story. Excellent book and a good movie. But I think the movie's only better if you have read the book, just because I think like on its surface it's probably like a fine movie, but it's engaging and fun and interesting, more so having read the book. But it has that kind of like Safdie brothers whizzing and whirling around in high speed pace. There's a lot of unnecessary violence, and it's intense, and it's who's the actor who plays Elvis? What's that guy's name?
I haven't seen that either.
Okay, well,
Man, movie. I love movies.
Austin Butler. Austin Butler. Austin Butler's the main character.
Should've
It's a
said
good
Dune
movie.
2.
I
would have
better
gotten
book.
that original immediately.
I haven't seen Dune 2. Anyway,
You haven't seen Dune 2?
Well,
Oh man.
no. To that point though, we'll see how many guys get caught stealing. But it's all right. Go ahead. Fifth thing, Statcast.
We're going off the rails here. The last one for me is Statcast, like you said. Orioles Spring Training Ballpark, Ed Smith Stadium, for the first time is going to have Statcast installed on the ballpark, so we can get velocity readings, movement, that kind of thing from all of these guys in spring, and not have to wait for them to go on the road. For a couple of pitchers last year, we had no velocity readings all of spring because all of their starts were made in home games. So now that it's actually in all 30 parks now. Across Major League Baseball. That was something that happened this offseason. So we will now be able to get a full spring's worth of data on these guys, which only helps us to have a better understanding of where these guys are at, like we said with Eflin, but also pitches guys are working on, whether or not, Ynier Cano is moving away from the cutter and focusing more on the sliders. Is he getting the necessary movement on the slider that he needs? Those kinds of things certainly help inform us of where guys are at going into the season, and also just in terms of projecting what they're going to be able to do. It goes a long way.
Cannot wait for Friday. By the time people listen, it'll be one day away, and we'll have again the second iteration of Fake Baseball. And the countdown is on. How many days are we from opening day?
Ooh, I don't know off the top of my head. All these spring days are running together, but I know it's about 4.5 weeks, so somewhere in that. March 26th is the date.
There you go. Have you spent any time at the beach? Have you gotten away from the field and enjoyed Florida?
Yeah, Wednesday was actually my first day off since I got here. Jacob Calvin Meyer, my trusty partner, had us covered from the ballpark, so I spent the morning at the beach. First time I was there for more than 10 minutes, so that was really nice. Get some sun. Hopefully the farmer's tan is not too crazy now because it has really been coming in full force, sitting wearing polos every day to the ballpark. But yes, finally got a chance to catch some sun and actually soak in the fact that I'm at the beach in Florida.
Earned and deserved, my friend.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we're going to go ahead and wrap there. Like I said, we will have Josh on next episode talking NFL Scouting Combine from Indianapolis, which will be super fun as we start to dive into Ravens draft content, and as well as some actual baseball games to talk about regarding the Orioles for the first time since September. So very much looking forward to that and seeing if I was right in my prediction of Nestor Herman starting the Grapefruit League opener. So Sam, any final words for the good people?
Just to thank you. We're now through 3 episodes. First 2 have eclipsed 1 million listeners. So just a huge thank you to everyone who's followed along and enjoyed. And we're excited about this, and we're eager to hear what people think. If you have thoughts, questions, if there's something you want to hear us talk about, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on social media or email us. Matt, do you have the email off the top of your head?
Yeah, it is earlybirdspod@baltsun.com. So feel free to reach out to us there, to follow us, reach out to us on social. We are at Sun Earlybirds on Twitter /X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe, obligatory plug, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and have a good one.
We've won millions, taken on the largest insurers, and backed up our reputation with big wins in the courtroom. But only one injury case matters, yours. So if you want to win, we're ready to fight for you.
Rice Law. Best advice, call Rice.